Hello, everybody. And for our next panel, we have, I believe, Inadvisably Compelled. How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Cool, cool, cool. Thank you again for joining us. I believe you're on the East Coast.
I am.
Cool, cool, cool. Would you mind sharing your name, or should I call you Inadvisably?
Just icy is fine.
I see. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, Inadvisably Compelled, IC, is the author of the Webfictions Blue Core and Paranoid Mage. I think Blue Core finished a few months ago and clocks in at around 300,000 words.
No, no,
Correct me if
no.
I'm wrong.
Blue Core
Oh,
finished.
700,000 words.
Yeah, I was gonna say it
Yes,
finished
way
in
longer.
January.
In January,
Yeah, and it's
almost
like
a year ago.
750,000, something like that. Yeah.
Right. And you've recently been writing your new fiction, Paranoid Mage.
Yeah, which turned out a lot better than I expected.
Yeah. I was just on your Discord channel, which I recommend to the attendees, and I was reading there. Somebody wrote like a whole blog post about Paranoid Mage being a meteoric star
Yeah,
in
it
the web
was it
fiction
was
world.
interesting. It was a blog post about the first intro, like how to create the tension that pulls people in. And it was an interesting blog post. You can share that if you like. I don't actually even know who wrote it. I don't know who that person is, but they wrote it, so it was neat. So
Cool, cool. So, as another author who's made a transition from one successful fiction to now another fiction, what has that experience been like? And has there been any lessons on writing, or even publishing, any kinds of lessons that you might have learned from the first 2-3 years of writing?
yeah, well, I think unlike most of the other people here, I'm fairly new to any professional writing. So I had to learn how to get my formatting done for Amazon from scratch and how to get my paperbacks actually working so they didn't look terrible, which was a lot more complicated than I thought. Um, I think that was most of the lessons that I had to learn. The actual writing lessons have just been like an ongoing incremental process. I've actually been writing for a very long time. It's just most of it's really bad and it's never going to see the light of day because it's so terrible. But I mean, I'm 40 and I've been writing since I was a kid. But it's all been, just sort of here and there, sort of a vague hobby sort of thing. It wasn't until I became aware of web fiction that I actually started writing consistently. And writing consistently is the only thing that gets you anywhere in terms of actually getting good at it.
When was that period of first familiarizing or getting to know
Oh,
web fictions?
web fiction. That would be back around 2015, 16 is when I first started it.
Fairly.
So I mean, I've been writing for a long time, but I've only been writing seriously for an embarrassingly short amount of time, to be honest. Uh,
So that like a switch for you of like eureka moment of like, oh, this looks like something I could do, like I could
it
write web
kind
fictions.
it kind of was like I started out. This is a little bit embarrassing, but I started out with fan fiction, just because fan fiction is just so easy and so low effort in a lot of ways. Because all the work for the setting has been done for you. You don't have to do any of that effort, so you can just do some character stuff and you're done. You don't even have to do the character stuff completely because most of the characters have been done for you. So I started doing that, and then I realized, hey, if I hold myself to a schedule, I actually get ready done, and I actually get better at writing. And so Blue Core was actually it's not the first thing I published. And I'm not going to mention the other stuff I published because, like I said, it's terrible. But it was the first thing that I published that was essentially published for with any sort of monetary thing attached to it, and that did actually a lot better than I thought. And Blue Core was what, like 2.5 years, 3 years of writing, and I learned a lot about how to condense things. It's one of the things I learned is that it's so very easy to just wander off into the weeds and spend words and words and words and stuff that ultimately doesn't matter all that much.
Would that be, in part because, and I believe I was reading the epilogue or afterward, and because Blue Core first started out as similarly to what Dave was saying, like a small project, and
Yeah,
that grew into this very massive piece of work that
yeah,
wandered down and incorporated a lot of, I believe you were mentioning things like dungeon core, kingdom building, other stuff.
yeah. It got out of hand and it worked well enough, but it just showed me that I really need to have a better grasp on the scope of what I was doing and not just like the entire plot, but introducing aspects to things. It's so tempting to just say, this is really cool. I'll put it in. And then it turns into this just absolute bugbear later on because you have to resolve it somehow. You have to include it. You have to remember it. And if you don't, you break your setting. And if you do, you break your story. So you have
Mm.
to be very careful. I mean, I think I managed to mostly avoid that with Blue Core, but like I said, I'm actually fairly new to the writing scene compared to everyone else on this panel. So these are all lessons that I had to learn because I don't think that you can learn these just by reading about them. You can only learn these when you do it and you actually see it and experience it yourself. There's just so many subtleties. So
Yeah, I think that we've gotten a few questions for aspiring authors, and I think that's a good point. You can read all these books on how to write, but unless you actually dig in and write consistently, you don't know what your strengths are as a writer, or perhaps weaknesses that you might want to shore up. Uh, Speaking on that, what would you say that you had a strength as an author?
spite. Spite is my strength. So both Blue Core and Paranoid Mage were written in a sense out of spite. Blue Core
Mm,
was like, I don't like so many of these um, dungeon core novels that I've been reading. I read like a whole bunch, and I was like, I don't like the way that these go. And now there's a lot of really good ones out there, but when you go through the Dregs and Kindle Unlimited, and you see some of the really bad stuff, you're just like, this is so terrible. I could do better. So that was kind of that. For Paranoid Mage, it was very similar. There's a lot of urban fantasy that I read. I'm like, wow, I hate everything about this.
mm,
And it may not even be badly written. It's just I personally disliked it a lot in certain respects. I'm not going to name anything, obviously, but so so both of those sort of came from a position of I don't like how this is being done. I want to do it a different way, and so Drew, um, so so I'm going to do it, my way,
cool.
and that's how those ended up. So we'll see if that continues. Uh, I know that other authors have done that, like Roger Zelazny very famously wrote A Night in the Lonesome October because someone bet him he couldn't make Jack the Ripper a good guy. So
Maybe we can put a kind of positive spin on that and discuss web fictions or traditional books that you've really enjoyed, perhaps, and maybe
yeah,
inspired or influenced you as well.
so my favorite author so far as the actual crafting of the prose and the story goes is Roger Zelazny. Not his Amber series, which is what everyone's familiar with, but his single books like Lord of Light or This Immortal, partly because he does something that hardly anyone does. I definitely couldn't do, and that is he integrates religion into it in a very interesting way. Uh, and there's so many powerful symbols and stories in religions that if you treat them respectfully can be used to great effect, and I've always been impressed by that. I really like CJ Cherry's stuff. I think that her ability to produce xenofiction, minds that are not human and don't think like humans, as well as somehow make just the conversation over tea to be this absolutely pulse pounding tense scene. It's like these are things that I wish that I could do, and I I aspire to be able to do at some point. I see the mountain, I see the peak, and I see that's where I want to go, even though I'm not anywhere near it.
We got time and hopefully many books to go with you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned writing for a very long time as a kid,
Hmm.
but you've worked as a not non-writer for a long time.
Yes. Yes.
So was writing still kind of like uh, a dream perhaps for you since young?
It kind of was, but not in any real sense, because I learned early on how rare it was to actually be successful with writing. I met some professional authors when I was a kid, and I looked up the statistics, and I was like, "Ooh, that's not likely." So I always sort of kept it as a hobby. And I mean, even when I was when I was writing Blue Core, I was working 50 hours a week, um, on a normal job, as it were. So I never really expected, even though I really liked writing, I never expected it to become a full-time successful professional job.
I see. With Blue Core, were there any influences from like light novels by chance, like Japanese light novels or
You know, it's interesting because Blue Core was only done with a little bit of lit RPG reading. I've read a whole lot more since I started it. Um, and I actually toned down the lit RPG elements over time in Blue Core. Um, I've read a lot of light novels, but I don't think that I've taken much influence from them. There's a lot of interesting things that they do, but I tend to be more interested in subverting a lot of what they do because they've already done it. Especially since how rapidly the web novel and light novel uh, scene moves. By the time that something has come out and for more than like 10 chapters, 6 other people have grabbed onto it and have started something similar. Sometimes it's even better than the original. So a lot of the time when I see a light novel come out, it's either very, very polished because it's treading over ground that other people have iterated through and found all the flaws in, or it's something that's so off the wall I don't even know how to begin applying it. That's not to say anything bad about web novels, light novels. It's so much fun to read a lot of this stuff, and in a way, I think that's the most important thing. Is like, even if it's not this profound novel, if it's fun to read, I don't care. There's a lot of stuff that is executed maybe in a substandard way, but it's so fun to read, I don't care.
I mentioned that because, and we have, a theme in Blue Core is the explicit scenes, and I
Yeah.
think light novels have found a lot of success because of their explicit nature,
Yep.
and even in very popular, Korean webtoon scenes, there's a lot of explicit. So we used to call this smut in the
Yeah.
webtoon industry, smut or sex,
Yeah.
sells. But one thing that I noticed was that you in the afterword was, you said it's very easy to write any explicit scene, but for you, you found explicit scenes difficult to write because you wanted to make it up to your standard.
Yeah.
Um, so that's why I was wondering, oh, like, and that's what light novels do, right? They use a lot of cheap explicit.
Yeah. And it was kind of weird. I was like, I actually consciously said, yeah, I'll put in explicit scenes because I know that will get me an audience. And I'm a complete unknown and I need to get known in some way. And so that was a very calculated decision to add in explicit scenes because, like, there's an audience. It doesn't matter what you write. If you write explicit stuff at all, you'll get at least some people. But I also didn't want to be just a just known for that. So that's why I had this extremely high standard for what I was doing. And it's it's actually very difficult to write good explicit scenes that is not just tawdry, right? It actually has uh, character elements or plot elements. It's like it it's almost a little bit like writing battle scenes. Like for a lot of lot of novels, you can almost skip over what happens in the battle scene. All you care about is the outcome. But some of them you actually enjoy reading. So
yeah, so I also, because I noticed also that in Paranoid Mage, I'm not all caught up yet, but there's been a distinct lack of explicit scenes, romantic elements and tensions perhaps, but
yep.
was that a
Well,
conscious decision?
yeah. I mean, for some stories it works. For Blue Core, like there was an actual specific reason and methodology for the sex approach in Blue Core. I think I've said this before, but pain in a novel is kind of irrelevant. It's a thing that happens and then no one cares about it in, 3 sentences later. But sex is a little bit different. Intimacy changes the way that characters interact with each other. So that's actually one of the reasons why I went with it, is because it's like, if you have to actually be intimate with someone, that changes the character dynamic. Now I forget what the question was.
Oh no, just that the explicit lack of
Yeah.
explicit scenes in
Yeah.
Paranoid Mage.
Yeah. And Paranoid Mage it's just not that type of story. And if somehow there's a story where that would be relevant, I might write them again. If there's not, then I won't. I'm not really fixated on including them or not including them. It's just what is appropriate.
Yeah, and Paranoid Mage has seen great success even without the explicit scenes, or maybe because it doesn't have, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's the thing, is it's a built-in audience, but it's also a lockout, because a lot of people are just going to be like, oh, well, it's just a smut novel, I'm not going to pay any attention to it. And that's fair enough. There's a lot of really bad, just smut-oriented novels, and it's one of those things where you can very easily lock yourself into a corner and be known only for writing sex stuff. And there's plenty of authors that have success that way, but it's not really what I was interested in.
Right. I think I was reading an article where Japanese mangakas,
Mm-hmm.
they get their start drawing, NSFW explicit scenes, but
Yep.
like make their way into the more traditional mainstream.
Yep.
Nothing wrong. Nothing wrong
And
with.
that it's not just Japanese people. The people who do Girl Genius, if you're familiar with that webcomic,
Yes.
they started out as doing pornographic stuff as well.
Mm.
I mean, it's not it's a known way to actually get to break into the industry, is you get known enough and then you move on to less salacious
Yeah.
content.
I think maybe not for web fictions, but I read a lot of mangas and webtoons as a kid, and that's what even the most mainstream mangas would do. In the first 2, 3 chapters, they'll show a lot of fan service in the first few chapters, and then they'll develop into an action manga or drama or anything like that. But continuing on with on this theme of Paranoid Mage, could we pick your brains a little bit about what you think has made Paranoid Mage so successful?
Well, pragmatically, it was probably the first arc. Uh, it was an introduction where the character has a lot of agency. I'm not sure if everyone here has read Paranoid Mage, but the departure from the norm that I have there is in normal urban fantasy, a lot of normal urban fantasy, even stuff like Harry Potter, is the person gets sucked into the magical world and they get introduced and they go about doing whatever they do in the magical world with all this overarching hierarchy. And in Paranoid Mage, he goes, heck with that, I'm out. And he just leaves. And that's just such a departure from the normal framework that I think that intrigued people. Add into that he's a character with very strong moral limits, because chapter 6, I said, if you like chapter 6, you'll like this story. If you don't, you won't. Chapter 6, where he's just kills a bunch of people. And he's a normal guy and he kills a bunch of people because he thinks that if you are this way, you are evil and you should die. And that is a very strong statement. That's a statement that makes a lot more sense in a fantasy world, like an isekai type fantasy world, than it does in an urban fantasy world. Urban fantasy is generally more very shades of gray and stuff like that. So I think part of why it's been popular, other than just general quality of writing, which I hope is good, is the fact that it is quite different than the way that urban fantasy tends to do things. And like I said, I read a whole bunch of urban fantasy, and I was like, I don't like the way that this does things, so I'm going to do it my own way. So I did this completely separate thing, where I was like, what if someone is like, vampires just prey on people, so why would you ever tolerate that? There's just no world in which, like, for Callum, for the protagonist of Paranoid Mage, there's no world in which you would ever tolerate someone preying on people. It's like, well, they have to. It's like, I don't care. We kill animals that eat humans, the crocodiles and tigers and whatnot. If they become man eaters, we kill them. It's like, why wouldn't you do that for anything else? And I mean, that's pretty severe for some people. I've had a lot of feedback where it's like, he's just a murder hobo. So, but I still think that's probably one of the main reasons why it's interesting is because it's a different take.
Right. Thank you for that perspective. We have a few minutes to take questions now.
Sure.
If people would like to take or submit questions on the Q&A.
There's actually several in here already.
Oh, I see. Let's see. For Paranoid Mage, how did you approach looking at what the government thought was a secret and what you wanted the main character to learn?
So I kind of was taking inspiration from the guilds back in the Renaissance era. My conception is that these are a whole bunch of people who have been around for about that long. They're all immortals, and this is a big bureaucracy. So you're going to have, basically, you have a whole lot of people keeping personal secrets, and you have a whole lot of government level secrets. Governments keep a lot of secrets, even if they keep them very badly. So it was a combination of how does the government act and how do these guilds act. So it was like, actually a lot of things are just not going to be publicly available. They're going to be known in the right circles, but it's not going to be something that's talked about out in the open.
Another question is, you said you disliked a lot of urban fantasies you've read. What do you think is the most important thing to get right for good urban fantasy?
Not making ordinary humans to be just completely useless. A lot of urban fantasy, it's like, oh, they're afraid of humans. But if you look at the way that the actual mechanics of the system and the setting operate, it's like, no, they can just hijack basically every aspect of human governance and do whatever they want. And I kind of failed at that with Paranoid Mage, but I'm trying to, with Paranoid Mage, I tried to fix it by essentially making it so that the reason why they are all hidden is that they didn't actually get power until relatively recently. A lot of urban fantasy has all fairy tales are true, everything's been around for forever. And in Paranoid Mage, it's like, no, they only got the power to not be horribly killed by any random person with a bow and arrow, around World War I or whatever. It's like, because of the way that everything is set up in Paranoid Mage, the way that magic works, it's not as easy and straightforward to just hijack people as it is in a lot of these urban fantasies.
Right. And you've established like a power dynamic between all different races as well, right? Do you think that there's a possibility for a paperback release of the Blue Core series, similar to PM?
There might be. The last time I checked, and this was quite a while ago, so it may not be true anymore. Blue Cores, because they're like, the books are like 250,000 words a piece. They're actually too large for the maximum size on the self-publishing portal. Now, they may have changed that, and I do need to look at that. And if that is the case that I can release it in paperback, I will work on doing so. I'll have to get new covers and whatnot because of the way that those work. So there is a possibility, but last I checked, it was actually physically impossible for Amazon to do it because it was just too long. Because I was stupid and I make really, really, really long books.
Sounds good. And I wish you all the best with all the publishing stuff. We'll take another 4-minute break and then we'll be back with our next panelist. Thank you so
Okay.
much, IP.
Thank you.